Welcome back to the Idaho Alternate Assessment Science Portfolio Tutorial Series. My name is Karen Striegel, and I am the Special Education Coordinator for Alternate Assessment, Low Incidence Disabilities, and Medicaid School-Based Services. If you viewed Tutorial 1, you will remember that the purpose of this tutorial series is to prepare special education teachers and staff to implement the Idaho Alternate Assessment, also known as IDAA, science portfolio, with their students with the most significant cognitive impairments who meet the Idaho Alternate Assessment participation criteria. You may also recall that the tutorial topics correspond with the major sections of the Idaho Alternate Assessment Science Portfolio Manual. As you work through these tutorials, you will find page references to the Idaho Alternate Assessment Science Portfolio Manual on some slides. This second tutorial explains the content assessed on the IDAA Science Portfolio. We will be unpacking the extended content standards and objectives in science for grades 5, 7, and 10. You will want to have your IDAA Science Portfolio Manual and the Science Extended Content Standards with you while viewing this tutorial. The link to download the Science Extended Content Standards is included as a document with the tutorial series in the Idaho Training Clearinghouse. Pause this recording now to gather these materials if you don't already have them. You can see here the topics I will discuss in this tutorial. Let's get started. The IDEA and the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, both require that alternate assessments be based on alternate academic achievement standards. What a mouthful, right? You may have seen the abbreviation AA-AAAS. As required by IDEA and ESSA, alternate academic achievement standards must be clearly aligned with the general education achievement standards. In our case, Idaho calls its alternate academic achievement standards the extended content standards, which are aligned with the Idaho content standards. As of this summer, the extended content standards in ELA, math, and science are posted with the general education standards on the Idaho Content Standards webpage, and this is where they belong. Since the extended content standards are aligned with the Idaho content standards, the Idaho alternate assessments in all content areas are aligned with the ISAT. In science, there are 5 standards or content areas with one extended content objective chosen from each content area to be assessed at each grade level. This means that 5 objectives are assessed on the Idaho Alternate Assessment Science Portfolio at each grade level. Within each of the 5 objectives, there are 4 levels of complexity. I know this sounds a bit confusing, but it will all make sense as we unpack each science extended content objective a little bit later in this tutorial. Now you want to open your IDAA Science Portfolio Manual to page 12 and open your Science Extended Content Standards to the section for the grade level for your students. That is grade 5, 7, or 10. You might want to pause the recording while you do that. Within the relevant grade level, you will find 2 pages with the 5 objectives, with 1 objective per row. Within each objective row, you will see the complexity levels ranging from 4 to 1, with 4 being the most complex. The information listed at each complexity level is an example of the objective, but it is not intended to be the specific content you teach and assess. When considering an entry point for baseline data, instruction, and assessment, you would choose the complexity level at which each student would have the most independent success. I know this is complicated. Take a deep breath. I will explain all of this in more detail as I unpack each objective in the next section. I'm talking about a very delicate balancing act. You want to collect baseline data, provide instruction at the highest level of complexity for each objective at which the student can be the most independent and show what they know with the most accuracy. Your personal knowledge and experience for each student will be important as you make decisions about appropriate levels of complexity, independence, and accuracy. I will talk about this in more detail in Tutorial 4. As you keep breathing, keep in mind that the Science Extended Content Standards are organized by grade level. As I unpack the extended content objectives, I have organized them by content area. I know the use of content area is a little confusing. You are probably asking yourself, isn't science the content area? You will see what I mean as I discuss each content area. Now turn to page 13 of your IDAA Science Portfolio Manual. You will see information about each of the 5 Science Extended Content Objectives organized by content area. Looking at the Science Extended Content Objective 1 as an example, I included a screenshot of a part of Objective 1 to illustrate my points. In this case, the content area is Nature of Science. This means that the content of the first Science Extended Content Objective to be assessed on the IDAA Science Portfolio is related to the nature of science. Then you see 2 goals with their equivalent numbering convention listed for the first objective, 1.2 and 1.1. In some cases, there is only 1 goal per objective. The objective numbers follow the goals with the specific grade level associated with the objectives to be assessed. In this case, Objective 1.2 is assessed at grades 5 and 7, while Objective 1.1 is assessed in grade 10. Finally, you see a statement describing the critical function of the objective being assessed. It is important for you to be mindful of the critical function of each Science Extended Content Objective assessed, so that your teaching and assessment do not become too narrow because of the complexity examples listed in the Science Extended Content Standards document. I'll explain what I mean as I discuss each objective. Phew! That is complicated. I promise it will get easier as we go along. Keep your manual and standards close. So, now we look more closely at Science Extended Content Objective 1. The content of Objective 1 is the nature of science. Having your IDAA Science Portfolio Manual open to page 13 will be helpful. There are 2 goals associated with the nature of science content. Goal 1.2 covers understanding concepts in science related to the processes of evidence in science, science models, and using science vocabulary to explain scientific concepts, processes of evidence, and models. Goal 1.1 requires students to show that they understand scientific systems. Don't be confused by seeing the goals listed out of order. Goal 1.2 appears before Goal 1.1 because Goal 2.1 is assessed in grades 5 and 7, while Goal 1.1 is assessed in grade 10. The critical function explains that these 2 goals are about students making observations, making predictions, collecting, recording, displaying data, and analyzing data on a scientific system. Luckily for us, the IDAA Science Portfolio Manual includes examples of systems relevant to Objective 1. You see them listed here. These examples help make sense of the first Science Extended Content Objective in the nature of science. Hopefully, you are starting to think about what would be relevant for your student participating in the Idaho Alternate Assessment Science Portfolio. Next, we will look at Science Extended Content Objective 1 for each grade level. You see here Grade 5 Objective 1. This exact information appears on page 1, row 1 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. The first column gives the specific Science Extended Content Objective with its official numbering convention 5.ns.1.2.1a. Since Objective 1 for 5th grade relates to making observations of a system and using data to make predictions, the note defining the system acceptable to teach and assess is helpful. As I mentioned a little while ago, the descriptions at each level of complexity serve as an example of types of tasks and/or activities to illustrate the different complexity levels. Remember, these are only examples to help you understand the levels of complexity, not the exact tasks or activities required. The other point to keep in mind is that as you make decisions about the appropriate complexity level for your student, be sure to choose the complexity level at which your student will have the most success with the highest level of independence. You see here Grade 7, Objective 1. This exact information appears on page 3, row 1 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. The first column gives the specific Science Extended Content objective with its official numbering convention 7.NS.1.2.2a. This objective is about making dependable inferences from observable data. Even though the types of systems are not defined at grade 7, as you saw for grade 5, you will recall that page 13 of the IDAA Science Portfolio Manual and slide 12 of this presentation list systems examples. Again, you can see examples of tasks and/or activities that illustrate each level of complexity. You can read these for yourself as you make decisions for your students. Now for grade 10, Objective 1. This exact information appears on page 5, row 1 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. The first column gives the specific Science Extended Content objective with its official numbering convention 10.NS.1.2.1a. It reads, demonstrating understanding of a system. Again, refer to page 13 of the IDAA Science Portfolio Manual and slide 12 of this presentation for a list of systems examples. Remember to use the tasks and activities under each level of complexity as a guide for what you teach and assess. Now, on to Extended Content Objective 2. The content area for Extended Objective 2 is physical science. You should already have your IDAA Science Portfolio Manual open to page 13. Physical science only has one goal, 2.1, which states that students will understand the structure and function of matter and molecules and their interactions. The critical function provides practical information about what goal 2.1 requires. It is talking about students recognizing the states of matter, grouping objects with the same state of matter. You remember those pesky states of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. This slide shows grade 5, Objective 2. The exact information appears on page 1, row 2 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. Extended Content Objective 2 requires 5th graders to describe the physical differences among solids, liquids, and gases. This objective is straightforward, and the levels of complexity provide clarity for instruction and assessment. This slide shows grade 7, Objective 2. This exact information appears on page 3, row 2 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. Although Objective 7.S.2.1.2a is about properties of matter, its relationship to the critical function described on page 12 of the IDAA Science Portfolio Manual about states of matter becomes apparent in the examples at each level of complexity. Now for grade 10, Objective 2. This exact information appears on page 5, row 2 of the Science Extended Content Standards document. So Objective 10.S.2.4.4a is not as clearly aligned with the critical function as the 5th and 7th grade objectives. However, having students identify matter that has basic electrical properties and the tasks and activities described at each complexity level are straightforward. For the rest of this tutorial, I will review each Science Extended Content objective in general terms as they appear in the IDAA Science Portfolio Manual. However, I will leave it to you to study the grade-specific objectives on your own. Science Extended Content Objective 3 covers biology, with the goal for students to understand that the cell is the basis of form and function for all living things. The critical function lists the vocabulary that students should recognize and understand. You will find the grade level objectives clearly aligned with the critical function. Earth science is the content area addressed by Science Extended Content Objective 4. Goal 4.1 requires students to understand scientific theories of origin and subsequent changes in the universe and Earth systems. Thank goodness we have the critical function on this broad goal. The cycles and relationships identified in the critical function appear in the objectives at each grade level. Finally, we come to Science Extended Content Objective 5 in the Technology Content area. There is a goal for each grade level. The goals are listed in numerical order, but not in grade level order. Goal 5.1, Understanding Common Environmental Quality Issues, both natural and human-induced, is assessed at grade 10. Goal 5.2 is related to understanding the relationship between science and technology, and it is assessed in 5th grade. Finally, Goal 5.3, Understanding the Importance of Natural Resources and the Need to Manage and Conserve Them, is assessed in 7th grade. As with the other 4 objectives, the critical function provides helpful information for interpreting the goals and align with the grade level objectives. In review, this tutorial covered topics related to understanding the content assessed on the IDAA Science Portfolio. Now you know where to find the extended content standards and objectives, how they are organized, how to interpret them, and how to use them as you teach and assess your students. Congratulations! You have completed Tutorial 2. The next tutorial covers the process for administering the IDAA Science Portfolio with your students. Congratulations! I would like to thank you for your time and attention to this tutorial. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me anytime. Simple questions are easily handled over email. If you have complicated questions or are not sure how to ask your question, please give me a call.